is cultural anthropology? Yay! And what are we doing today? Today we want to know, what is cultural anthropology? I don't know what we've gotten ourselves into here. What is this thing called cultural anthropology? Now, many of you said that you've been through, some of you quite a lot of anthropology. Some of you have been in an intro class, but some of you haven't. And so we're looking here at the first chapter, the Introduction to Cultural Anthropology, which is, it's a pretty, how to say, it's a big chapter, because I guess I would say that cultural anthropology is a big topic. It's kind of, it has a lot in it, and this chapter is trying to sum up kind of the whole book. So we're going to back up a little bit, and that's our big question for this class, is what is cultural anthropology? We'll back up a little bit and talk about anthropology itself, especially in the United States and in North America. So as our author, Laura Tubel de Gonzalez, or just Gonzalez, states on page 6, in North America, anthropology is considered to be a 4 fields discipline. So some of you have had some biological anthropology. Some of you have had some archaeology. Cyrus, didn't you just come off of something pretty archaeological? How was that? Would you recommend that?
Fun for me, but you know, I like it.
Too much dirt?
Oh yeah.
Hard work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sunburned all the time.
Sunburned all the time. Oh, okay. Every other year we try in June to give the archaeological field school at Pine Lake. If you can at all do it, I would heartily recommend it. But Cyrus knows sunburn, dirt, and hard work. But that's the archaeology part. There's also linguistic anthropology, which concentrates on language, sometimes considered related to or a subpart of cultural anthropology. But basically, the way that anthropology developed in North America, the United States, Canada, Mexico, was to unite these 4 different fields under the same roof. But in other ways, you might say that when it comes specifically to cultural anthropology, if you went to other places in the world, that would be considered to be anthropology. So in other countries, a lot of times archaeology is off on its own, and biological anthropology is kind of off on its own. And when they say anthropology, they mean cultural anthropology. And this sometimes happens in the United States as well. So those of you who have been through an intro to anthropology at Hartwick College know that you've had a little bit, either with me or with Professor Sugandhi, you've had a little taste of all 4 fields, a little bit. But at other schools in the United States, for example, if you go to SUNY and take Intro to Anthropology with Dr. Sally Hahn, who is also my wife, she just teaches a cultural anthropology class as the intro. And if you want to take an intro to archaeology, well, that's a separate class. So there's a lot of places, even in the United States, in which anthropology is cultural anthropology, or that's how it's introduced. It's also the largest subfield, so it has the most people in it. Although in popular culture, people often know archaeology or stones and bones, as they put it, the bio part, better than the cultural part, in kind of academic practice, the cultural anthropology is the largest subfield, and in some ways sometimes becomes perhaps unfairly equated to anthropology. So one of the things Gonzalez tells us about is that if you look, for example, at the United Kingdom, There they call what we call cultural anthropology social anthropology. And in the old days, I think there was some people who tried to distinguish this, and they said that the Yanks did more like symbols and stuff like the cultural stuff, and the Brits did more of their social structure, and so that there was a difference between them. But really, for all intents and purposes, they're pretty much the same with different names. And so some people have combined the name and call it sociocultural anthropology because it's hard to figure out what the difference is between society and culture anyway. And so some people have combined it, and that's kind of my preference to do because it doesn't seem to be that worth debating the differences between those two terms. So what is cultural or sociocultural anthropology distinguishes it from other branches? One is that for the most part, cultural anthropologists are studying contemporary societies, people that you can talk to in the present, you can go to and do field work with. And so it's distinguished by a period of immersive field work, usually at a minimum about a year, in which the budding anthropologist will go to another place, or maybe in their home place, but try to immerse themselves in the society or the culture they're studying, doing what we call participant observation. So observing, but also participating, maybe to a too huge extent sometimes. Right, Seth? What happens the first thing you read here?
Well, the first opens with the story about the guy who his name is also.
His name is also Seth. I can see why you'd be drawn to this from the very beginning, yes.
And he's with a whole bunch of laborers who are crossing the border, and they get caught by border patrol. But like him not only studying them but also being with them as they're like going through that, like I was just like drawn to that. Like I didn't think of anthropology or something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty immersive. I once assigned a book by someone named Jason De Leon, who wrote a book called Land of the Open Graves, who had a kind of critique of this. He said, that was too much. You shouldn't be going over the border as a person like that because, you're going to get out, but what happens to the people around you? So anyway, but it's an extreme example, but it does testify to this idea that you're with the people you're with. They're not just the people you're studying. They might also be your friends. You're learning from them as much as about them. And so the stuff that cultural anthropologists tend to produce is a qualitative analysis. That is to say, cultural anthropologists do use quantitative tools, surveys, those kinds of number counting things. But for the most part, what the research is presented as is either as a book about it, a film, something that describes the people that you've been studying in a kind of qualitative or narrative sense. So this is, I think most cultural anthropologists would agree on these as a hallmark of what cultural anthropologists do and what distinguishes them from other branches of anthropology and from other parts of the academy. Now, there's definitely sociologists who do ethnographic field work. A lot of these techniques have been used in, for example, in education and different fields. But cultural anthropologists kind of pioneered them, we might say. So, cultural anthropology also importantly concentrates on the idea of culture or learned behavior, what we learn to do as human beings. And we'll be talking like I said, this chapter is an overview, and this class right now is an overview of stuff that we'll be talking about a lot more as we go through the course. We'll have occasion to meet Ruth Benedict in Gods of the Upper Air, for example. But Ruth Benedict wrote a book in 1934 called Patterns of Culture, which in some ways was the truly best-selling book that that introduced this idea of culture into the world. The word was there already, but it wasn't used very much outside of a pretty narrow circle of anthropologists. And so it is with Benedict's book and the efforts of other anthropologists today, if you hear the word culture a lot, we probably have, you've probably heard it a lot, it's in some ways because of anthropology introducing it to the world. Now, anthropologists were not the only ones thinking about learned behavior and the importance of learned behavior. Felicia, you noted that John Locke was out there doing his tabula rasa thing, right? The blank slate idea. So interesting precursor to some of these ideas of culture. But it sort of, again, solidified within anthropology. Now, so far, so good, I would say. But then we look on page 5, and then things get kind of funny or weird, or, well, Mickey, you know this. What do we learn about culture? How would you define it? No, sorry. How has all kinds of anthropologists defined it? I think you quoted that there are as many definitions of culture as anthropologists have written about them. Yeah, I'm putting you too much on the spot for today. But there's been all these definitions of culture. We might ask ourselves, what's going on here? Why are there so many culture definitions? Gonzalez gives us one that may be the oldest. You don't have to copy this down. There's too many words. Back in 1871. Tyler. So old that he's using the word man to hopefully mean people, but he probably just means man because he's so old. 1871, 150 odd years ago. That complex whole, which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. What do you think? It's a fair definition. I think Gonzalez says that it's held up well enough or something like that. Just change that over into human and just gotta modernize it a little bit. Well, let's look at this a second, though. Knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by people as members of society. If somebody tried to tell you that this is a good definition of a term, what do we usually call this kind of thing when you just say blah, 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 and anything else? This is like a big, I don't want to call it a laundry list. Do we use that word? Where you like throw everything in? Everything. I mean, it's just a list of almost everything. So, I mean, it might work, but it doesn't inspire us to do much other than say, wow, a lot of stuff in there. Got a big laundry list. A laundry list? I don't know. Now I'm saying that, it sounds weird. I'll go with it. So, what we're going to, in some ways, be talking about in this class is that anthropologists like Franz Boas, Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, people that we're reading about, took this big old laundry list of stuff that this old guy was talking about and turned it into something else. which is they deployed it against a common explanation for why people had capabilities and habits, right? Because in 1871, when Tyler was saying this, the commonest explanation that the Europeans had for why people had different capabilities and habits was that they had different racial capabilities and that habits were racialized. And so what these early anthropologists, after some notable missteps, were trying to do was to talk against a whole idea that people were determined by their biology, race, genetics, we would say today. So if we sort of put this, and those of you who've been with me in intro have maybe seen something like this. So that in the late 19th century, and by that I mean around the time that Tyler was writing, around 1870s or so, there was a view in the Europe and the United States that was an ethnocentric view. I guess my terms coming fast and furiously now. Ethnocentric means that you're concentrated on your own society and you think your way of doing things is the only right way of doing things, right? We'll talk more about all these things. In this view, which was propagated by the anthropologist, US anthropologist before Boas, Lewis Henry Morgan, was the idea that there was one line of evolution and that people began in a kind of state of primitivism or savagery, and then they progressed up to be barbaric, barbarism, and then they finally could be like us at the top, civilized man. And so the idea was that everybody could be ranked on a ladder, and that different cultures would be ranked, different races, different societies would be ranked like this. And so one of you asked the question, how could people think this? Well, I mean, there were a lot of people in Europe and the United States who had the world had been arranged in a very unequal hierarchy in which some people were on the bottom, made to work for other people, bought and sold. And it was justified by this idea that they were naturally inferior and naturally in a state of savagery or barbarism. And so the world was structured in what we might call a racist way. It was also structured in a way that I would say was anti-Blackness, especially focused on people in Africa and then later in people in Australia. So they were sort of at the bottom of or considered to be at the bottom of this hierarchy. And that was kind of a prevalent idea. And so what some of the early anthropologists were doing was saying, no, people are not determined by their race or their biology, but we learn how to do things because of our culture. So what this resulted in, I think, is that cultural anthropologists, after kind of going through some not so nice times, have a tendency to be socially and politically engaged. And in part, that's because what you are doing when you do an ethnography or you immerse yourself in the field work of other societies is you are documenting different human possibilities, all the ways in which life can be different. So if we take the example of Seth Holmes, who was crossing the border, not Seth, in some ways, he is trying to bring out the humanity of people who are not seen and not visible, even though they're critical to the whole functioning of our economy. And so that obviously has some social political implications. It's not simply, I went off and saw some pretty stuff. I saw some ritual somewhere. It tells us something about what people are capable of and how there are different possibilities in the world. So sort of at the core of cultural anthropology has been this dialogue with being socially or politically engaged in the world. Now you might wonder, I mean, I think that helps, I hopefully explain what, for example, when we get over to talk about some of the lineages of anthropology, and Gonzalez starts talking about Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and the Communist Manifesto and how that was influential in anthropology. Well, Francis, what did you think? What's Karl Marx? What's going on there? Yeah, so I mean, to us in the United States, often if we hear about Marx, it's usually in the negative as this sort of bad person that we shouldn't be listening to. But I think for many anthropologists, they saw this inequality that Francis just discussed, the way society was organized. And because of this, because anthropologists were often documenting the people who were the losers in this situation, it tended to make people gravitate toward the issues that Marx was addressing. Marx also famously was one of the people who postulated the idea of modes of production, or the idea that what you produce, your food, your housing, your clothes, all those things, the way that you produce those things has a lot to do with how you'll see the world and how you live in the world. And so, again, anthropologists were drawn to this because it gets us away from the idea that how we see the world and how we participate in it is simply a natural thing that's biologically given. For Marx and Engels, it was part of how people are taught to live and work in the world. And I think, although Gonzalez doesn't discuss this very much, Marx also points us to an idea that different people were connected to each other. And so the things that would happen, say, for migrant farm workers were going to be crucial to the overall functioning of the economy. And so where other people just wanted to talk about the top rungs of society, Marx and his followers saw these things as interconnected to each other. Is something that anthropology took on as well. We also might wonder, Francis, you also flagged this, the feminism. What's the deal with this feminism? Right now I'm picking on you. Yeah, a little feminism coming in here. Oh, so that was a question. Yeah, I mean, I think that we'll be talking much more about this later on, but around, say, the 1970s, there was a realization, or people pointed it out in a forceful way, how much had been left out of what had been done before that by all these old guy anthropologists. So both the researchers, being guys, and the subjects, privileging male points of view. So part of it was simply to restore the balance here, as Francis said, include more people. But as we just talked about, the other thing that was so brilliant about what the feminists did is they took these kinship charts and different marriage patterns that anthropologists had figured out and different ways that different organizations of sexuality and gender. And they're like, whoa, look at how different things can be in different parts of the world. Maybe that means that the way we're doing things isn't the only way to do things in life. Right? Maybe the idea that there's only one way to be married or one way to be female or one way, or that there are only two genders, is an artifact of our own society, not something that was given to us by nature. And so these issues are in some ways obviously wonderfully with us today, because, but I think we have a lot of thanks to people who are looking around at different possibilities and documenting them. And so that, you know, what the feminists did here is in some ways dust off the documentation that had been done and that some people consider just strange curiosities, and said, wait a second, there's a whole different system of possibility for how different societies could be organized. So I was going to include a slide that would say, don't be afraid of feminism or Karl Marx, in the sense that I'm not saying that everything these folks said was correct, but we want to be careful not to just push their insights aside because we don't like the names that people have called them. Instead, I decide on this, which is that I think cultural anthropology might be at its best when it's in a kind of renegade position, when it's fighting things. And as we'll read in Charles King's book, that's one of the words he uses, how a circle of renegade anthropologists reinvented race, sex, and gender in the 20th century. So renegade means someone, I mean, if it actually, I looked the word up once, if we use it about Native Americans, it's actually used as a derogatory term because it was seen as something that, you know, a rebel against the colonial order. But in this sense, it's somebody who's sort of fighting against the establishment, you might say. So, I mean, one of the things that anthropologists fight the most, right, is the idea of ethnocentrism, or that our own way of life is the only way of life, the only natural, good way to live, God-given, best way of life that's ever been. Maybe we're at our best when we're fighting against those ideas that people are determined by their race, and that certain people were made to do different things because of their racial position in society, or fighting against those stereotypes about what little boys should do and what little girls should do and how everybody should fit into those categories, and the misogyny that has dominated much of science and much of the academy. Did I say that already? I did. It's at the top. I forgot to take it out from there. So in this sense, culture is not so much a definition or a concept unto itself. It's something we use to fight against other ideas. It's an anti-concept. And anthropology isn't so much an academic discipline as much as it is fighting against those other people who want to establish themselves and tell us about the world. So it becomes anti-disciplinary. The renegade anthropologists. Now, that said, here I am and here you are in a classroom. I'm getting paid and you're paying tuition. This is called the academy, right? And as anthropology joins the academy, as we're trying to like establish ourselves and sell some textbooks and, you know, make sure everybody's got the right grade and you got the right degree and you're going out to get a job and I have a job and you have a job, right? Now we're in the establishment. And as anthropology fights it out to keep up in the academy, well, a lot of things happen. One, we come up with all these subfields. We'll talk about those in a second. We're going to talk about each of these things. Also, we get very heavy-duty theoretical because, hey, if you're going to be using all these big words, then you need somebody to teach you all the big words, and then you got to spit them back to me. And if you don't, then bad things happen. So, you know, as we join the academy, our heads get bigger and bigger, our words get bigger and bigger, our sentences get longer. And we accept the hierarchies that are, right? Because, hey, I got to get ahead. Doesn't matter if somebody is in a position of inequality, I'm making my own way up in the world. And so the whole idea of fighting against racism or fighting misogyny, who wants to do it? Career killer, right? You just kind of nod and carry on if you can. You're just trying to make your way in the world. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's this contradictory impulse that, on the one hand, cultural anthropologists have had this sort of fighting stance, right? Trying to realize how people that we did research with need to be considered as full human beings, which goes against the grain of much of European and US thought. But on the other hand, as we become an academic discipline, you know, it's like those bands that they started out real good and then they're just trying to sell you a record. I guess they don't sell you records anymore, but get more streaming downloads, you know, get their fans riled up. So one of the things that happens is there's a few subfields that develop in cultural anthropology. Yeah, I mean, and these are just some of them. You know, I mean, I guess that's exciting, all these things that you can study. A little bit overwhelming to me, but you know, she put most of them in there, many of them. Taylor, you were so brave. I want to know about all these subfields. You still do? Pick one. Pick your favorite. We can talk about one of them. All right, let's do public. Good one. I like that one. I mean, public anthropology, I think, is trying to get us back to the idea that anthropology isn't just an academic discipline, that it should be out there in the world, that it should be saying something beyond the classroom and the books we write and talking to each other. And so public anthropology tries to do a little bit of stuff out there in the world. Sometimes I like to think that I have a little tiny bit of a public side, because if you go to those web comments that you just wrote, and let's say your mom's searching along the internet and she's like, oh, what's that person taking in class? Oh my gosh, hey, Liam, what did you write? Oh, she can see it. So, you know, you might want to just, maybe you want to take down your last name and just kind of, some people like to go with a little alias there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't care. I'm all out there, but you know.
Really not.
So, you know, just a little, yeah, as you're logging in to discuss, some people just like to say their first name, guard their public identity there. But, you know, the idea of public anthropology is that it should have something to say outside of the academy. Let me pick one more, because some of you have taken it, medical anthropology, which in some ways is a subfield of cultural anthropology. Dr. Connie Anderson teaches that here. But it also brings together, I think, cultural anthropology, biological anthropology. So in some ways it comprehends both of these fields. I would say that that's one of the biggest developing fields there is right now. But, you know, some people get down on this because they feel like it fractures things into all these subfields. So it could be fun. Our author says that when she went to graduate school, she says that it seemed like anthropology had theorized itself into a very confusing state. Page 15. And then she talks about postmodernism. Probably never want to talk about again. But yeah, it's kind of this idea that in some ways anthropology, as it entered the academy and started talking to literary critics and theorists of various kinds, things got confusing, big words, equations, numbers, or a kind of desire to look more scientific. So you have a bunch of calculus and stuff, formulas, make people feel like it was a science. So I think that, like I said, this is sometimes part of and there's a reason sometimes to use big words and be precise about your concepts and ideas. I don't think there's nothing to that, but you want to maintain yourself as understandable. The other thing that happens as anthropology became a discipline in the academy is that in some ways, as we've talked about, culture was used as an idea to go against these ideas of racial determinism. So it's like, no, it's not race, it's culture. And as some of you who've been through biological anthropology know, and maybe some intros know, the whole idea that there are these biological separate races, anthropology has called into question that idea. But for the most part, anthropology did not embrace the more serious anti-racism of, say, W.E.B. Du Bois, who did some really wonderful ethnographic work in Philadelphia and all other places in the United States, but was pretty much left out of the academy and certainly not included in the canon, the official books of anthropology. Or, and we'll read about Zora Neale Hurston in Gods of the Upper Air, someone who became famous actually mostly after her passing as a novelist, but was trained by Franz Boas and sent to do field work among African Americans. Again, not embraced in the academy, not given a degree, becomes famous after she's gone as a great thinker, but was not really part of the anthropological tradition. Similarly, on the one hand, anthropology, cultural anthropology, especially in the United States, built its credentials on studies of Native Americans, indigenous peoples, indigenous Americans, we might say. But, oh, I guess I'm picking on Taylor a little bit. What does Vine Deloria Jr. tell us about this?
And I know it's like it was during the Red Power movement. That was in it a little bit. About it.
Yeah, that's a great title, right? Custer died for your sins. Huh. So what anthropologists were doing, on the one hand, on a sort of hypothetical, theoretical level, they were in favor of Native Americans, but a lot of them were also digging up bones, taking artifacts out and putting them in museums, taking the studies that they would have and getting a whole career going and leaving the other people behind. And so when Deloria Jr. wrote this, it's actually a very famous phrase or a very famous paragraph on page 19. Into each life, it is said, some rain must fall. Some people have had bad horoscopes, others take tips on the stock market. But Indians, and by this he means Native Americans, indigenous peoples, but there's a sort of appropriation of that term, have been cursed above all other people in history. Have anthropologists. Anthropologists have come there to do their thing. Compilation of useless knowledge for knowledge's sake should be utterly rejected by our people. His theme. Don't come here just to get knowledge for knowledge's sake. Try to learn what needs to be done because we're hurting here. So again, although anthropologists on the one hand were trying to argue for the humanity of people who had been subject to some of the cruelest conditions in this country, on the other hand, were participating in that. So, where does that leave us today? Cultural anthropology today, which is a very small section at the end of the chapter. I think Taylor said it could be a whole chapter, and that's probably true. It starts off with this little phrase, the world is getting smaller. When we hear the phrase, the world is getting smaller, we nod our heads in agreement. Juliana, you nodded your head in agreement with this. Do you think the world is getting smaller?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a different vision of the world getting smaller than I'd even thought. You're saying there's more and more people, and so there's not enough room for us bumping into each other all over the place. That's kind of a scary view of the world getting smaller. I guess I was just thinking about being able to, you know, fly all over the place, see some people on the internet, eat some sushi downtown whenever I want to. Small world. Anybody feel like, I guess whenever anybody says the world is getting smaller, I have this counter idea in my mind that I think about all the places I can't go now that I used to be able to go, that are just off the map for me. I feel like the world is getting more and more circumscribed. Yeah, Lee. Where or how?
I don't know. It's come to a point where you can go pretty much anywhere in the world if you really wanted to, but to be able to actively engage in anything in that area, you need to know language and all that stuff. But you can't just go places that exist as you are now and actually gain information from that, right? Like the world is getting smaller in terms of we can communicate all around the world to go wherever we want, but there are still large language barriers between a lot of people.
Yeah, and I feel like whole sections of the world are periodically taken off my possibilities. Like, you know, maybe I wanted to run a field school in Ukraine. Maybe I want to, you know, be in different places. You know, the whole separation of the tensions between China and the United States, some of the digital divides that are, so I don't know, sometimes I feel like my world is getting smaller, not the world is getting smaller, but it could be happening. There are certainly tendencies in the other direction. So what our Gonzalez says here is, since the world is getting smaller, Juliana put it, all these people are all around us. Here they are with us. People are bumping up against people from different parts of the world with very different points of view. I guess that's true. So what Gonzalez says is that leads to some essential career skills that anthropology can provide or teach you, which is to be interested in the people that are bumping up against you, to understand diverse points of view. Some of you who are seniors get to have your diversity requirement fulfilled by this course. The rest of you are on a different curriculum, so no worries. And the ability to work with others. Oh, that's probably a good thing for all of you on the flight path. The ability to work with others, collaborate, others who might be different from you. So these are seen as kind of things that anthropology can teach you to do. For me, I guess I would like to, in some ways, I want you to be able to have essential career skills and work in a smaller world, but I also want us to pay attention to what I think are some huge, well, not I think, they're just out there, some huge issues that we all have to confront as we decide what our careers are going to be and how we're going to deal with the people we're bumping into. We cannot escape where we're going to stand on issues of racial justice, on the climate crisis and how it's changing our world, on how we navigate the terrains of gender and sexuality, on what to do with how to be a person who is in transit between various societies. The number of people who are in some ways stateless has increased a lot. They don't have they are refugees of some sort. And in general, in a lot of these ways, the ways that inequality has shaped our outcomes in the world. So there's a couple different ways that Gonzalez will be concentrating on a couple of themes that will flow throughout the book. One of them is the issue of food, how food is produced, distributed all different places, and how we're going to have access to food under these conditions, and that plays into all of those issues. And the other one is on the idea of sustainability. Actually, Pluto, you talked a little bit about sustainability. What drew you to this, or what did you get out of it? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways, because anthropologists have studied all over the world and with different peoples, hopefully we've been able to document how there are different ways to live with our planet. It's not to say other people are necessarily in harmony with their environment, but they show us different ideas about how we can differently mobilize our resources. So I guess I would say that my hope is that cultural anthropology today will help us with these essential skills, because we need to, graduate and get a job and make a living, but that it will also direct our attention to the ways in which anthropology and the world still needs to be renegades or fighting against some of the structures that have led to the situation that we're in. So, what is cultural anthropology? Very complicated. It's a complicated field. We will hope in this class to unravel some of the different threads to tell stories about it. But I will just be upfront that this has always been the most difficult class that I teach. I keep changing it up all the time. So we'll try to navigate it. It's a pretty huge field and you can take it in a lot of different directions. I'll try to help you out and guide you through it.